Morning returned like a hush, soft and pale, over the waking land. Mist clung to the edge of the fields, and the coolness of dawn still lingered in the air. Noah stirred early, not from restlessness, but from the simple pull of the morning. He walked slowly past the grove, past the sleeping tents and homes, past the kill where yesterday's fire still gave off a faint warmth. His staff tapped gently against the stone path, a rhythmic note of presence in a world otherwise still. A group of children trailed behind him, giggling and whispering as they tried to match his pace without disturbing the calm. Noah, pretending not to notice, led them toward the eastern rise, a hill that caught the first light like a chalice. They reached the top just as the sun broke free, golden rays spilling over the trees, washing the earth in a quiet blaze. "Watch," Noah said softly, pointing to the horizon. In the distance, a flock of birds lifted into the sky. Not doves, not ravens, ordinary birds with speckled wings and sweeping arcs, alive with the joy of flight. The children fell silent. "Everything returns," Noah said, "even the sky." Later that day, the village prepared for the equinox, a simple festival of balance, marking the day when light and dark shared the sky equally. This was a new tradition, born not of old law, but of new life, a celebration of cycles, of harmony. Its tables were dressed with woven cloth. Flowers were gathered and placed along the walkways. A long reed flute was passed from one elder to the next, each adding their own melody to the song that would greet twilight. Noah sat beside the grove with his wife and listened. He did not play, but he remembered the tune. He hummed it softly. Nearby, Shem was organizing the younger boys to carry wood. Ham was laughing with the potters over a cracked bowl that had become a lantern instead. Japheth helped string lanterns from olive branches. Each moment was ordinary. Each one was enough. That evening, as shadows lengthened and the stars prepared to arrive, Noah's granddaughter returned to the carved dove once more. She found it just as she left it, surrounded by pebbles, bathed in moonlight. She knelt beside it and placed a tiny offering, a sprig of lavender and a strip of cloth dyed with berries, symbols not of mourning, but of thanks. Behind her, the village was alive with flickering light and music, voices lifted in song. The harvest meal had begun, but she stayed in the grove just a little longer, listening, feeling. The carved dove seemed to glow softly in the dark, a guardian of peace and memory. When she finally stood and turned to rejoin her family, she paused and looked back. "Thank you," she whispered, to the dove, to the story, to the sky. And then she ran, barefoot and laughing, into the arms of her waiting people. As the days grew warmer, the village shifted into its season of abundance. Vines thickened with fruit. Bees moved in golden spirals across blossoms, and the hum of life rose with each new dawn. Noah's steps had grown slower now, but his eyes were no less bright. He spent many afternoons beneath the old fig tree, a woven blanket under him, his staff resting nearby. Children often gathered around, not with demands, but with curiosity. They would bring him feathers, odd stones, or questions. Why do birds fly together? What do clouds taste like? Did you cry on the ark? To each question, Noah responded, not with answers, but with stories of the sky's first rain, of the raven who never returned, of the moment he heard silence after 40 nights of storm. One child, a boy with curls the color of dry wheat, asked, "Were you ever afraid?" Noah looked into the fire, its soft glow dancing across his hands. "Yes," he said gently, "but I trusted more than I feared." The children nodded, some understanding, others not yet. Still, they stayed and listened. One quiet morning, Noah took a walk alone. He moved slowly, as though retracing steps he'd walked 1,000 times, past the vineyard, now rich with hanging clusters, past the water wheel creaking steadily in the brook. past the drying herbs strung from doorways and the sound of laughter echoing from workshops. Eventually, he reached a place he rarely visited anymore, the last standing section of the ark. Time had worn it down, but a few beams remained, standing like sentinels, moss-covered, sun-bleached, and holy. Noah sat beside the beams and touched the wood. "I remember," he whispered. He could still feel the pitch on his hands, still hear the restless stir of hooves and wings in the dark, still smell the damp cedar planks. He closed his eyes and breathed in the memory. Then, without ceremony, he pulled a small tool from his robe, a whittling knife, and carved a single line into the wood. A mark, nothing more. He stood, kissed his fingers, and touched the beam once more, and then he left it. Twilight spread across the sky. Noah returned to the village. The evening was filled with soft murmurings, songs, footsteps, the crackle of a shared fire. His great-granddaughter met him with a shawl and wrapped it gently around his shoulders. "Tell us a story," she said. Noah sat, the blanket tucked around him, and looked up at the stars beginning to flicker awake. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he watched the light, the faces, the village breathing in unison. And when he finally did begin, his voice was steady, warm, and low. "Our story tonight," he said, "begins with a dove." The fire crackled softly, and all around him, the circle grew quiet. Even the younger children stilled, their faces lit orange by flame, eyes wide and waiting. It was a time of waiting, Noah continued, when the waters had fallen, but the earth was not yet ready. "We sent out the raven, bold and black as night, and he circled and did not return." He paused, and the wind stirred the grass. "But then we tried again. The dove, gentle, quiet she, flew from my hands into the unknown. She came back once, empty. She came back again with a gift." He smiled, his gaze far away. "A leaf, a single olive leaf, proof that life had returned." The children leaned in. "That was when I knew," he said. "Not because the ground was dry, not because the ark rested still, but because the dove, she chose to come back. She found peace and returned to share it." Later that night, long after the last ember dimmed, Noah lay awake under the stars, listening. Not for voices, not for dreams, just for breath, sown, steady and full, as the world's rustling softly through leaves. He thought of the dove again, her flight not a search, but a promise, a bridge between fear and peace. He let his mind drift on the wind, tracing the river's curve, the flicker of torches below, the rhythm of feet dancing on packed earth. So much had changed, and yet the heart of it, all of it, remained the same. Hope sent out. Hope returned. By the next morning, the village stirred to life with the ease of habit. Baskets were packed for trade. The elder children prepared for lessons under the olive tree. A new loom was being assembled beside the weaver's home. Noah rose slowly, warmed by tea and wrapped in a soft wool cloak. His wife joined him, arm in arm, as they strolled toward the grove. Surprise waited for them there. Around the carved wooden dove, a ring of small figures had been placed overnight, animals shaped from clay. Each one nestled gently in the grass: an elephant, a fox, a lamb, a bird with outstretched wings. The village children had made them. Noah knelt beside the circle. He picked up the lamb and turned it slowly in his hand. "They remember," his wife whispered. He nodded. "Not just the flood," he said, "but the promise." He replaced the lamb, stood, and let the moment settle into him like sunlight into skin. The world did not need to forget to move forward. It needed only to remember with kindness. That afternoon, the air turned golden with sunbeams drifting through swaying olive branches. Birds called softly from treetops, and bees traced lazy spirals through lavender. It was a day that asked nothing and gave everything. Noah sat once more beneath the fig tree, a basket of dates beside him, his staff resting across his knees. He wasn't alone. Several of the village elders had gathered, seated in a loose circle around the tree's roots. Clay cups passed between them, filled with cool, spiced tea. Their talk was light at first, repairs to the vineyard wall of the new child born 2 days past, of the sourness of the last batch of cider. But as shadows grew longer, the conversation turned to memory, to meaning, to what they would leave behind. Noah listened more than he spoke. He traced patterns in the dust with the end of his staff, eyes distant. "I worry sometimes," one of the younger men said, "that we forget too easily that peace makes us soft." Noah looked up. "Peace," he said slowly, "does not make us soft. It makes us ready." The group fell silent. "Hardness helps you survive," Noah continued, "but gentleness helps you live. One builds walls, the other plants gardens." They nodded, thoughtful. "I have seen both," he added, "and I choose the garden." That night, after the moon had climbed high and most of the village had drifted into sleep, Noah returned to the grove. He carried a small bundle wrapped in linen. He knelt by the wooden dove and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a scroll laged and inked with care, a retelling of the flood, but not the way he'd first spoken it. This version was for the children, for their children. He placed it in a carved wooden box beside the dove and closed the lid gently. A library of one. But it was enough. As he rose to leave, a breeze stirred the trees. Leaves whispered, grass bowed, and a single white feather drifted down from the sky. It landed on the box. Noah smiled. The story was safe. The people were ready. And the dove always would fly. In the days that followed, the season turned gently toward harvest. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of ripening grain and the faint salt of distant rains. Leaves began to show the earliest blush of gold and amber. Noah rose each day with the sun, walking slower now, but with a quiet certainty. He was greeted by neighbors, not with awe or reverence, but with warmth, with familiarity. It's the way one greets an old song that still stirs the heart. One morning, a small group of children gathered around him again. This time, they brought not questions, but stories of their own. "My goat had twins," said a boy with a wide smile. "My mother says the moon looked bigger last night because it was listening," added another. "My sister thinks the carved dove talks when no one is around." Noah listened, delighted. "And what does she say?" "It speaks of up wings and water and leaves." The girl replied, "Stars." "Ah," Noah said with a nod. "Then she's hearing truly." That afternoon, the village gathered for the weaving of the autumn cloth, a tradition new enough to be alive with invention. Long strips of dyed fabric ochre, russet, indigo were hung across beams and wound around tree trunks. Children ran between them, laughter trailing behind like ribbons. Noah watched from a bench under a fig tree, the sun warm on his shoulders. His wife joined him, her hand slipping into his with ease born of years. "The colors are brighter this year," she said. He smiled. "Or perhaps our eyes have grown wiser." In the center of the square, a young girl began singing. Her voice, clear as spring water, rose slowly over the crowd. It was a song Noah had never taught, but one he somehow knew. It spoke of waiting and watching, of floods and feathers, of hope sent out and peace returned. As she sang, others joined, one by one, until the whole village was singing. And Noah, heartful, closed his eyes and sang too. The weeks passed gently, like a river without rush. The days were still long, but the sun's arc now touched the edges of cool twilight a little sooner. Trees began to hum with the energy of coming sleep. Even the animals moved more slowly, as though savoring the final golden days before rest. Noah spent more time listening than talking now. He sat under awnings and in courtyards, beside ovens and weaving looms, letting the life around him fill his senses. He listened to the hum of work, the gossip of birds, the stories of children whose imaginations outpaced even the stars. Kay, his great-grandson, came to him one morning with a question different from the rest. "Grandfather, what do we do when there's no storm, no flood to prepare for?" Noah leaned forward, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "We give thanks," he said, "and then we build, not boats, but bridges, gardens, homes. We plant peace where we can." The boy nodded slowly. "And we tell stories?" he asked. Noah smiled, especially then. The village had begun crafting a book not of law or commandment, but of remembrance, scrolls bound in soft leather, pages stitched from pressed flax, each filled with drawings and words. The elders each contributed, and even the children added their marks. Animals sketched in charcoal, verses written with unsteady hands. Noah was asked to write one final story, one that would live beyond the breath of his voice. He took many days, not because the words were difficult, but because the quiet was so beautiful. And when it was done, he placed the final scroll gently in the center of the book. The title read, "The Flight of the Dove," and underneath it, as told by Noah, "Servant of Peace." That evening, the village lit lanterns in every home, not because of darkness, but in celebration of light. The grove was adorned with swaying lights, each one reflected in the eyes of those who had gathered. Noah stood one last time beside the wooden carving of the dove. He placed his hand on the bird's wing. "Fly far," he whispered, "but return when you can." His wife joined him. Together, they stepped back, watching as children danced barefoot through the flickering lights. A song rose again, this one, older, slow, and deep. A lullaby passed through generations of wind and memory. And above them, in the night sky, a single white feather floated downward, catching the firelight as it turned. Noah caught it gently in his hand. Then he smiled, and the story carried on. In the soft hush of morning, dew glistened on every blade of grass, and the village slowly stretched into wakefulness. Chickens clucked, goats called, and the warm scent of rising bread filtered through the air. Life pulsed gently onward. Noah, wrapped in his cloak, made his way to the edge of the village where the fields met the open sky. From this hill, he could see the waters glint in the far distance, the same waters that had once covered all he knew. He sat on a low stone wall and watched as clouds danced across the horizon. A child joined him without a word, as she was small, barefoot, holding a wooden carving. It was the dove. "I thought she should fly today," she whispered. Noah nodded. "It's a good day for flying." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the steady rhythm of the wind. "Do you miss the ark?" the girl asked. Noah shook his head slowly. "I miss what it taught me, but I don't long for the storm." Is where the meaning settles. That afternoon, the elders gathered beneath the fig tree once more, this time not to speak, but to listen. The youngest children stood at the center, each holding a simple item: a stone, a feather, a leaf, a piece of yarn. One by one, they shared stories, not long, not polished, but deeply felt. "Taint, I found this stone by the river. Smooth now, but it used to be sharp. The water softened it. Huh? My feather came from the edge of the grove. I waited a long time for it to fall. My leaf is from the olive tree. I think it's the same kind the dove brought back." And the elders listened, their eyes shining, for in each child's voice they heard echoes of Noah's own, not in his words, but in his way. Skift, the quiet power of memory shared. As twilight returned, the village lit the lanterns again, not for any festival, but because it had become their way. A ritual of peace, a promise renewed. Noah watched the lights flicker to life from the steps of his home. His wife sat beside him, their hands entwined. "Do you think they'll remember?" she asked softly. "They already do," he replied. A dove cooed in the rafters above, its wings rustling softly as it settled. And in that moment, with the world at peace and the stars beginning their nightly bloom, Noah closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in rest, in trust. The story, he knew, was no longer his. It belonged to them, to the wind, to the wings, to every quiet night and every dawn that followed. The seasons turned, as they always do. The warmth of harvest gave way to the hush of winter, and then the gentle return of spring. With each shift, the village adapted, not out of fear, but with gratitude. Had learned that time, like the tide, could be trusted. In Noah's absence, the people carried forward the rhythms he had helped shape. The fig tree became a meeting place for stories. The grove where the wooden dove rested turned into a sanctuary for reflection. Even the smallest child knew to walk softly there, as if entering a sacred space. His great-granddaughter, now a young woman, continued to tell the story of the ark, not from duty, but from love. Her voice held the same soft cadence, the same reverence for quiet truth. One day, a stranger arrived in the village, tired, dust-covered, with a long road behind him and none yet chosen ahead. He was welcomed, as all were, with warm bread and open hands. He asked, "What is this place?" Child replied, "It's where the dove came back." Stranger looked up at the trees, the light dancing through their branches, and smiled. He understood. The years rolled forward like waves, always returning, always new. Buildings changed, faces came and went, but the story endured, not carved in stone, but etched in lives. Each generation found their own flood, their own dove, their own reason to hope. Every time the story was told, it began the same way. In the days of long rain and wide water, a dove flew. When she returned, she carried peace. The rhythm slowed, softened. A quiet breath passed from voice to ear, from heart to heart. And once more, the world was stilled by the sound of wings. On the 100th year since the ark had come to rest, the village prepared a festival unlike any before, not out of grandeur, but devotion. Lanterns were lit from oils pressed by many hands. A new cloth was woven with threads from every household, and the central square was swept until it gleamed like riverstone. Children gathered feathers throughout the season, fallen ones only, gifts from the wine stand, tied them to branches, doorposts, and walking staffs. The air shimmered with memory. At the heart of the celebration stood a new carving. It was not the ark, it was not the dove. It was a hand, open and upward facing, with a small olive leaf resting in the palm. Beneath it, an inscription read, "Peace is the gift that flies back to us when we send it first." As night fell, the villagers gathered around the fire circle, their voices blending into a single hush. The great-granddaughter, now a mother and elder herself, rose with the village's storybook in hand, her voice steady, familiar, and warm. She began, "Our story tonight begins not with a flood, but with a waiting, and a dove who returned." And the story, for the 1000th time and the first time, unfolded again, but not to end. To continue. The fire popped softly, casting flickers of light across the listeners' faces. They leaned in, even the eldest among them. Eyes shone with memories, and the children held their breath, drawn in by the pull of something ancient and sacred. As her voice wove through the familiar tale, she added pieces that were new details Noah had once whispered to her in the quiet moments of dawn, about the way the rain first sounded on the ark's roof, gentle like tapping fingertips, about the silence after it stopped, the hush that felt like the world had been emptied, just for them to begin again. She spoke of the animals, not just their numbers, but their personalities, the stubbornness of the goats, the regal quiet of the lioness, the elephant who once knelt beside Noah when his heart was heavy. And then she paused. The pause wasn't for effect. It was for reverence. The dove didn't just carry a leaf. she said. She carried a message that peace is possible, that life returns, that we are never too lost to be found. A murmur swept the crowd, a wave of emotion caught in the throat. The children sat up taller. The elders closed their eyes. Across the fire circle, someone began to hum. Softly at first, like the breeze through barley. It was a song Noah had loved. One, a beginning again, stepping into light after the storm. Others joined in, and soon the whole village hummed as one. No lyrics needed, just sound, just memory, just promise. Later that night, the great-granddaughter walked to the grove alone. She carried the storybook pressed to her chest, its leather warm from her hands. The wind had picked up, playful and scented with distant rain. She knelt by the wooden dove, now slightly weathered, but still strong, and opened the book. "I think it's time for another chapter," she whispered. The stars above blinked in quiet agreement. The leaves rustled their approval. "Okay?" And far in the distance, as if on cue, a single dove winged across the moonlit sky. One that carried echoes of the ark, but also the future. And so we turned the page gently and began anew. The seasons turned, as they always do. The warmth of harvest gave way to the hush of winter, and then the gentle return of spring. With each shift, the village adapted, not out of fear, but with gratitude. I'd learned that time, like the tide, could be trusted. In Noah's absence, the people carried forward the rhythms he had helped shape. The fig tree became a meeting place for stories. The grove where the wooden dove rested turned into a sanctuary for reflection. Even the smallest child knew to walk softly there, as if entering a sacred space. His great-granddaughter, now a young woman, continued to tell the story of the ark, not from duty, but from love. Her voice held the same soft cadence, the same reverence for quiet truth. One day, a stranger arrived in the village, tired, dust-covered, with a long road behind him and none yet chosen ahead. He was welcomed, as all were, with warm bread and open hands. He asked, "What is this place?" Child replied, "It's where the dove came back." Stranger looked up at the trees, the light dancing through their branches, and smiled. He understood. The years rolled forward like waves, always returning, always new. Buildings changed, faces came and went, but the story endured, not carved in stone, but etched in lives. Each generation found their own flood, their own dove, their own reason to hope. Every time the story was told, it began the same way. In the days of long rain and wide water, a dove flew. When she returned, she carried peace. The rhythm slowed, softened. A quiet breath passed from voice to ear, from heart to heart. And once more, the world was stilled by the sound of wings. On the 100th year since the ark had come to rest, the village prepared a festival unlike any before, not out of grandeur, but devotion. Lanterns were lit from oils pressed by many hands. A new cloth was woven with threads from every household, and the central square was swept until it gleamed like riverstone. Children gathered feathers throughout the season, fallen ones only, gifts from the wine stand, tied them to branches, doorposts, and walking staffs. The air shimmered with memory. At the heart of the celebration stood a new carving. It was not the ark, it was not the dove. It was a hand, open and upward facing, with a small olive leaf resting in the palm. Beneath it, an inscription read, "Peace is the gift that flies back to us when we send it first." As night fell, the villagers gathered around the fire circle, their voices blending into a single hush. The great-granddaughter, now a mother and elder herself, rose with the village's storybook in hand. Her voice steady, familiar, and warm. She began, "Our story tonight begins not with a flood, but with a waiting, and a dove who returned." And the story, for the 1000th time and the first time, unfolded again, but not to end, to continue. The fire popped softly, casting flickers of light across the listeners' faces. They leaned in, even the eldest among them. Eyes shone with memories, and the children held their breath, drawn in by the pull of something ancient and sacred. As her voice wove through the familiar tale, she added pieces that were new details Noah had once whispered to her in the quiet moments of dawn, about the way the rain first sounded on the ark's roof, gentle like tapping fingertips, about the silence after it stopped, the hush that felt like the world had been emptied, just for them to begin again. She spoke of the animals, not just their numbers, but their personalities, the stubbornness of the goats, the regal quiet of the lioness, the elephant who once knelt beside Noah when his heart was heavy. And then she paused. The pause wasn't for effect. It was for reverence. The dove didn't just carry a leaf, she said. She carried a message that peace is possible, that life returns, that we are never too lost to be found. A murmur swept the crowd, a wave of emotion caught in the throat. The children sat up taller. The elders closed their eyes, crossed the fire circle. Someone began to hum, softly at first, like the breeze through barley. It was a song Noah had loved, one of beginning again, stepping into light after the storm. Others joined in, and soon the whole village hummed as one. No lyrics needed, just sound, just memory, just promise. Later that night, the great-granddaughter walked to the grove alone. She carried the storybook pressed to her chest, its leather warm from her hands. The wind had picked up, playful and scented with distant rain. She knelt by the wooden dove, now slightly weathered, but still strong, and opened the book. "I think it's time for another chapter," she whispered. The stars above blinked in quiet agreement. The leaves rustled their approval. Okay? And far in the distance, as if on cue, a single dove winged across the moonlit sky, one that carried echoes of the ark, but also the future. And so we turned the page gently and began anew. Morning broke with a hush, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is pausing to listen. Dew clung to the petals of wildflowers, and the breeze stirred softly through the fields. Birds called in the distance, their songs meandering like ribbons of sound through the valley. The great-granddaughter sat beside the hearth with parchment in her lap and a quill in hand. Her fingers moved slowly, not from hesitation, but from care. Each word she wrote was wrapped in memory, pressed with intention. Her son watched her from the doorway, a fresh loaf tucked under his arm. "What are you writing?" he asked. She looked up, her smile soft. "A letter to someone I haven't met yet." He furrowed his brow in confusion. "Someone far off," she said. "Maybe 100 years from now, maybe more. But I want them to know that we remembered, that we kept the stories and added to them." He stepped closer and handed her the bread. She took it with thanks and tore a piece off, offering him half. Outside, villagers were preparing for the second day of the festival. Laughter rang across the fields, and the sound of hammers fixing bunting poles joined the gentle rhythm of morning. But under it all, there was something deeper, a stillness, a knowing, a trust passed from one generation to the next. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in streaks of rose and indigo, a young girl asked if she could visit the grove alone. Her parents hesitated. "It's late," her mother said. "She just wants to sit with the dove," her grandfather added. "I used to ask the same thing when I was her age." And so they let her go, with the lantern in one hand and her scarf wrapped tight. She walked quietly down the worn path, following the stones that glowed faintly in the last light. When she reached the grove, she sat on the small bench beside the carved dove and looked up through the leaves. Above, the sky was deep blue, speckled with stars like spilled grains of salt. "Hello?" she whispered. No one answered, but she didn't expect anyone to. It wasn't that kind of conversation. She pulled a folded scrap of paper from her pocket. It had just one line. What do I need to become to carry peace? She held it in her lap for a while before tucking it beneath the base of the dove, right beside the old wooden box. Then she leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the cool night air settle over her. In her dreams that night, she flew high above the clouds, feathers soft, wings sure, and in her beak she carried a message, not a leaf, but a word. Begin. The days that followed felt washed in golden light. The girl returned to the grove each morning, sometimes to sit in silence, sometimes to leave small notes beneath the carved dove, single words or tiny drawings only she understood. She wasn't the only one. Slowly, other children began visiting. They brought feathers, poems, and tiny tokens, river stones shaped like hearts, bark carved with symbols, strands of dyed thread tied in loops. The space became a quiet council for the young, a place of unspoken dreams and beginnings. One boy planted seeds near the base of the sculpture. Another placed a small bowl of fresh water each day. No one told them to. They simply did what felt like care. The adults noticed, but said little. They, too, understood the sacredness of silence. One morning, the great-granddaughter stood at the edge of the grove and watched the children gathering. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "He would have loved this." Her sister approached from behind, brushing loose curls from her eyes. "He does," she said. They stood together for a while, arms touching, watching the soft rituals unfold. Nearby, the wind combed gently through the grass, and a white feather danced in its current before settling on the carved dove's head. Cute. The village soon decided to copy the tradition. Small peace groves began to form in surrounding communities. Each grove had a carved symbol, not always a dove, but always something that represented hope. Some used trees with copper leaves that caught the sun. Others built wind chimes from glass that sang in even the gentlest breeze. The movement grew not from law or demand, but from invitation, from story. Travelers began arriving in the original village to sit beneath the fig trees and hear the tale told where it first found soil. And those who returned home took more than memories. They carried seeds, they carried silence, they carried peace. In time, a map was drawn not of roads, but of groves, was called the Feathered Path. Noah's name was not written on it, cool, but his story was in every line. One late afternoon, a boy named Eli, barefoot and curious, found himself walking beyond the village borders. The sun was low, brushing everything in warm firelight. He followed the sound of birds until he stumbled upon a clearing he didn't recognize. There, standing alone among wildflowers, was a young olive tree. Its trunk was still thin, but strong. Its branches reached like arms in prayer. Eli approached slowly and noticed a ribbon tied around its base. On it were faded words, "Return when you are ready." He sat beside the tree, letting its shadow fall across his face. He didn't know whose words they were, or when they were written, but he felt known and safe. He began to hum a tune his mother had taught him, the same lullaby Noah once sang. The wind listened, the tree swayed, the sky waited, and the story continued. That night, a gentle rain began to fall, just a whisper at first. It tapped lightly on rooftops and threaded through the leaves like a lullaby. No thunder, no wind, its water returning to earth like a quiet memory. The villagers welcomed it, not with fear as generations past had done, but with reverence. Children set out bowls to catch the drops, delighted by the sound. Elders moved chairs beneath overhangs and simply sat, letting the rhythm wash over them. The great-granddaughter walked the edge of the village, her lantern casting a soft glow. She checked on the animals, whispered good night to the olive trees, and paused at the grove where the dove sculpture stood. The lantern's light flickered on the carved wings, which glistened with beads of water. She bowed her head and whispered, "Let this be a reminder." That night, many in the village dreamt of water, but not the kind that floods. Instead, it cradled, rocked, carried them gently like the ark once had. In the dreams, the dove flew far not to escape, but to explore. She passed over mountains and forests, over cities and rivers, finding other places where people left offerings beneath trees. In one dream, she landed on a windowsill where a child had painted an olive branch on the glass. In another, she perched beside a rooftop garden where an old woman tended plants grown from seeds carried across generations. Wherever she went, peace followed. And when she returned, as she always did, the world felt a little softer. In the days that followed, the rain continued, steady and calm. The river swelled slightly, not dangerously, but just enough to sing more loudly against the stones. Eli returned to the olive tree with a journal in hand. He had begun to write not stories of great heroes or storms, but simple things. Today, saw a turtle cross the road and waited until it reached the grass, helped repair the steps to the gathering hall. I gave my slice of bread to someone hungrier than me. He called the journal Feathers, I found. And each page, no matter what he wrote, ended with the same line. The story continues. The next morning, Eli brought his journal to the village gathering hall. He placed it gently on a table beside the community storybook, hoping just maybe that others would read it. By sunset, new pages had appeared inside. Others had written their own simple moments. I shared my blanket with a traveler. I listened without interrupting. I planted another seed. Each entry ended the same way. The story continues. A quiet movement had begun, rooted in kindness, not commanded, not choreographed, just lived. That night, as the lantern swayed and the stars blinked overhead, a hush fell over the village once again. A hush full of gratitude, of peace earned, not through victory, but through presence. The great-granddaughter stood at the doorway of her home, arms wrapped in a shawl, watching Eli lead a small group of children toward the grove. Some carried feathers, others held drawings. One held a bowl of water, careful not to spill. She smiled deeply, not because the story had ended, but because it never would. Far off, another traveler made his way toward the village, a scholar from a distant town, drawn by whispers of the feather groves and peace carvings. He had read old scrolls that spoke of a flood, an ark, and a dove, but never had he imagined a people who lived the ending of that story as though it were a beginning. When he arrived, he was met, not with speeches, but with bread, with warmth, with a quiet welcome. And when he asked, "What is this place?" a child answered, "It's where the dove came back." That night, he sat beneath the trees and listened not to a formal retelling, but to the wind, to the hum of community, to the peace that echoed in every rustling leaf. He did not take notes. He took memory. And when he left days later, he carried a single feather tied to his satchel in a vow to plant a grove of his own. And so the days passed, one feather at a time. The village carried on, not louder, but deeper. Seasons, as they always did, returned in gentle rhythm, and with them, the quiet growth of what had been planted long ago. And so it did. Seasons turned once more, weaving their familiar pattern of bloom and rest. The olive tree in the grove grew stronger, its trunk thickening with each passing year, its branches now a canopy of silver-green shade. Beneath it, the carved dove remained, its wood aged but unmarred, cared for by every child who had ever knelt beside it. Eli, now older, returned often. His journal had long since filled, its spine worn and soft, but he still brought new pages, inviting others to add their stories. It had become a sacred ritual, to write, to remember, to reflect. One spring, a new visitor arrived, a girl from a distant land who had followed rumors of the grove and the peaceful people who tended it. She brought no gifts, only questions. She asked, "How did you learn to live this way?" An old woman, once the great-granddaughter who had told the tale by lantern light, smiled. "We didn't learn," she said. "We remembered." That night, the village gathered as they always had, under the stars and beside the fire. The girl listened as the story of Noah was told softly, gently, with pauses that allowed the wind to speak. When the tale ended, she placed a ribbon in the grove. It read, "I will plant peace wherever I go." And in that promise, a new story began, one without end. For as long as feathers fall, as long as lanterns glow, as long as someone remembers to listen, the dove will return. Eli stood beneath the stars one final time that season, his breath visible in the cool air. Round him, the grove shimmered with offerings left by visitors from across the world, feathers, scrolls, carvings, dried petals, tokens from every walk of life. He laid a hand on the old wooden dove, its surface now darkened with time and touch, and he whispered a final blessing. May this be the last beginning they ever need. Before he stepped away, he looked up at the stars, the same ones that had guided Noah's Ark. In that moment, he imagined the great boat adrift again, floating gently across the sea of time. He thought of Noah's waiting heart, of the soft beat of wings returning home, of the olive branch held gently in a dove's beak. And now, all these generations later, that moment still echoed in this grove, in these children, in the quiet faith that peace always circles back. A soft breeze answered, not loud, just enough to stir the leaves. He lingered there a little longer, allowing the silence to speak. Behind him, a child's laugh bubbled from one of the nearby cottages. Lantern light flickered like stars trapped in jars. He remembered not just the story, but the stillness that followed it. He turned and made his way down the stone path slowly, taking one final look back before joining the others. The fires were burning low, the songs quieted, but the peace was louder than any voice. In a small house tucked between trees, the girl from afar had begun to write her own book. The first line read, "In a village where doves never flew far, I learned the weight of a feather and the strength of a story." She would carry that story across oceans, through cities, into hands that needed to remember. Her words would whisper into weary hearts. Her breath would soften even the hardest edges of fear. In time, children not yet born would listen to her voice and close their eyes as she whispered of boats and storms and silent skies. And the moment the dove came back, they would sleep to the rhythm of her telling. They would breathe deeper. They would begin to dream. And when they woke, the peace would still be there. Not a thing from the past, but a choice, a breath, a life. And somewhere beyond the treetops, another dove would rise. Sleep now. Sleep softly. You are safe. The stars are watching. And the story will still be here when you wake. And when you wake, will continue. And so the story lingered, never ending, only unfolding. Long after Eli's footsteps had faded from the stone path, and long after the lanterns in the grove gave way to morning mist, the rhythm of peace carried on like a slow tide. The girl's book spread across lands and languages, finding shelves and hands that needed gentleness. In cities swollen with noise, her soft words hummed in headphones and whispered from bedside tables. In small towns and quiet schools, teachers lit candles and read aloud beneath the maps of stars. A new grove began to grow, not in a single place, but everywhere a heart paused to remember. Tiny seedlings of quiet were planted in homes, in hospitals, in prisons, in lonely rooms. People painted doves on their walls. Children tied feathers to fences. Some placed olive leaves in their windows, a signal of hope for anyone passing by. Back in the original village, seasons folded one over the next. The olive tree dropped fruit in the fall, and in the spring, new shoots reached from its roots like arms seeking the sky. The museum walls slowly filled with gifts, a violin string, sea glass cross, a letter written in trembling script by someone who had not spoken aloud in years. The journal table needed a second bench, then a third. Visitors began leaving stories, not just of peace, but of return, of reconciled siblings, of long-awaited healing. Moments when the storm finally broke and light spilled through. Came still, every night, fires were lit. A gentle song carried across the fields like smoke. No instruments, just voices. Some sang of arks and doves and rain. Others sang of gardens and rivers and stars. And when the songs ended, silence always followed, not empty, but full. In one such silence, a boy leaned against his mother, watching the stars blink above. "Do you think the dove will ever stop flying?" he whispered. His mother kissed the top of his head. "Not as long as someone keeps listening," she said. And that was enough, because across the earth, someone always was. In a cabin by a fjord, in a hammock, in a sunlit courtyard, on a bench beside a crumbling library, on the floor of a hospital hallway, on the steps of a home once filled with shouting, now quiet. Someone always heard the story. Someone always passed it on. Someone always believed in the return. And so the feathers kept falling. The leaves kept rustling. The world, for all its noise and motion, made space again for stillness. And in that stillness, breath, a peace, a sleep, the kind that restores, the kind that remembers. And under starlight, under whispers, under prayer, the very same dove that once circled above an ancient ark, circled still, not lost, not wandering, but watching, waiting, home. Sleep now. Sleep softly. You are not alone. The sky holds your dreams. The earth cradles your rest. And the story waits with you. Always. The end.